Hi, it's Adele Michael back with a more Abundance Live, and we are talking about Fear to Flow Friday. How do you move from fear and feeling frozen into flowing with life and allowing life to give you more of what you're wanting? So I'd like to tell you a story about my friend Baca. This is Baca, Inez Borco. She is deceased now, but she and I spent probably 7 or 8 years being quite close. She lived in my apartment complex. She was from Croatia, and I will tell you her story. This is her probably about 8 years ago. She loved animals, and she would put corn out for the deer, and one of the corn kernels sprouted. So this is Baca and her corn. And my dog, Sophie, who is also deceased, loved Baca. Baca was her best friend. Sophie would walk with me anywhere as long as we stopped at Baca's house, because Baca had a cat named Fritz, and Baca would let Sophie eat Fritz's food. Dogs aren't really supposed to eat cat food, but Sophie did. Anyway, they were best friends. And Baca had a great sense of humor. She had a great joie de vivre. She told me as a young person in Croatia, her father left her family, leaving them at the poverty line. And she often didn't have enough to eat. But she said, I remember just dancing and singing. She was joyful. She was a joyful person. And I think that has a lot to do with how her life turned out. So she did grow up in Croatia. She was a teenager during the Second World War. She was conscripted by the Nazis to go work in a face mask factory in Germany. She was there with her best friend in pretty poor living conditions they were in a dormitory, bunks close together, rats. They didn't have a lot to eat, but they took care of each other and they made it through. And in fact, both she and her best friend married Germans. I can only imagine, I don't know the details because Baca didn't tell me this, her daughter did after her death. But I can only imagine that her husband was a security guard at the factory, as well as her best friend's husband. So they both married, and Baca had a baby. Happy in Germany, the war was over, the Soviets had taken over Croatia, and her brother was in the resistance and was arrested and put into a concentration camp. So was Baca's mother. So she had to go back to Croatia. She took as much bribe money as she could, and she tried to bribe her family out. Instead, they threw her into the concentration camp, where she broke rocks for the railroad that they were building. And her husband, a German citizen, came to try to rescue her. And they told him, if you don't leave, we will take your passport and you'll be in the concentration camp. So he left. I don't know if he and Baca ever saw each other again, and I'm not sure that she saw her daughter again. So she's in Croatia. She and her family finally get out of the concentration camp. She becomes a community nurse. She was not a school-educated person, but she was very smart and she cared about people, and she became a community nurse. She was also very cultured. Like many Europeans, she loved music, and she would, when she didn't have any money, she'd sneak into the symphony and the opera and listen just because it filled her up. So she's in Croatia, and Tito, who was the president of at that point Yugoslavia, was in the United States, spoke to the U.S. President John Kennedy. I think this was in '61 probably. And Kennedy goes, well, if communism is so great, why don't you open your borders so your people can either stay or go? And so Tito came home, took the challenge, opened up the borders. Baca had remarried, and had another daughter. And her husband was Hungarian, and he had lived in New York City in his youth before the Depression had sent his family back to Hungary. And he had always wanted to go back to the United States, so they booked a trip, a voyage on a ship to the United States. They got here. They went to Chicago, where they both had jobs. Baca was a dental hygienist, and her husband worked, I think, for the University of Chicago. And they raised their daughter, and they had a very happy life. They brought their winemaking skills and their love of music and culture, and they had a great life. And she always said that day that they landed in New York was her Independence Day. Her Independence Day. And she also told me that she couldn't believe how much was in the stores here. She would go into a grocery store and just marvel at how much was there. So it was really, coming to the United States was just a dream for her. And her daughter did well, became a dental hygienist herself, married, had 3 children. As she went back to work, she asked her parents to come and live with them so they could take care of the children, which they did. So she got to raise her grandchildren. And eventually they wound up in my area, and she was living in my apartment complex. We got to be friends. I would take her to the grocery store. We would go to see her at least once a day, so Sophie could have her cat food. And we just became great friends. And her grandchildren had grown up, and they were in high school, and every Friday she would host the teenagers, all the high school, her grandchildren's high school friends, for a lunch. And sometimes she'd make pierogies, which is a traditional Eastern European dish, and the kids loved that. She'd often fix musical vegetables because they make the kids toot. And a lot of ramen noodles. So she was just a fabulous person. And just to show you, I've showed you that picture of her with Santa. So I tell you that story because, no one I grew up with had really, well, that's not true. Well, it is true. In the Second World War, my father served in the Army Air Corps, which became the Air Force on Guam. And so he lived in the Pacific, but he wasn't in, fighting on the ground. He didn't have the war experience that a lot of Europeans did. So Baca was my first friend who told me about, she didn't talk about it a lot. She, as I said, she was very positive. But I believe that her going with her positive attitude and her ability to go with what life was giving her led to her being able to come to this country, to have a wonderful family. And up until the last probably 6 months of her life, she enjoyed pretty good health, and always that positive attitude. So I wanted to tell you that story to let you know that is one way into flow, to be with what life gives you. So I want to read you this poem by Dana Faulds. It's called Allow. Allow by Dana Faulds. There is no controlling life. Try corralling a lightning bolt, containing a tornado. Dam a stream, and it will create a new channel. Resist, and the tide will sweep you off your feet. Allow, and grace will carry you to a higher ground. The only safety lies in letting it all in. The wild and the weak. Fear, fantasies, failures, and success. When loss rips off the door of the heart, or sadness veils your vision with despair, practice becomes simply bearing the truth. In the choice to let go of your known way of being, the whole world is revealed to your new eyes. So I invite us all into allowing ourselves to be with what is right now, and allowing ourselves to go with the flow of life, because it will bring us to a new place, and it will bring us to more knowledge of ourselves, and perhaps a greater evolution of our spirit. So that's it for today. This is, I think I'm going to shake it up next month. I'm not going to do these Fridays, Fear to whatever Fridays, but I hope you've enjoyed them and gotten something out of them. I've enjoyed sharing them with you. And until next time, may the force be with you, and may you flow with life.